The grand halls of the Lyre Palace were built from crystal stone that shone like frozen light. Every visitor who entered the throne chamber felt wonder at its beauty, yet behind the silver throne sat a queen whose heart was heavy with sorrow. Queen Serenia ruled with calm strength, her words steady and her gaze sharp, but when the council left and the guards closed the doors, she often sat in silence, holding her crown in her hands as if it weighed more than steel. Years ago, during a border conflict, her two young daughters vanished. No one could explain how the royal escorts had failed to protect them. Some said raiders had taken them. Others whispered that the void had swallowed their ship. The queen had ordered countless searches, sent fleets across the stars, and spent sleepless nights waiting for news. Yet every message ended the same way. No sign. No trace. Only silence. Her people admired her strength, for she never let her grief break her in public. But the palace servants knew the truth. They often found her in the gardens at night, staring at the twin moons as if searching for familiar voices carried on the wind. Her daughter's laughter used to echo through the courtyards. Now only the sound of flowing fountains remained. On the anniversary of their disappearance, the palace grew quieter still. The guards walked softer, and the council spoke in hushed tones. They remembered the day when joy had left their queen's eyes. Serenia wore her crown that day as always, yet her heart felt like glass with cracks running through it. She walked through the chamber of memories, a private hall where portraits of her family were kept. Her daughter's paintings hung side by side. The elder, Lyra, had a gaze full of curiosity, always asking questions no tutor could answer quickly enough. The younger, Selene, had a smile that could brighten even the darkest corridors. Serenia stood before them and traced their faces with her hand, whispering words only the walls heard. "Where are you, my children? Do you still dream of home? Do you remember me?" The queen did not allow her people to see her tears, but here, alone with the past, her eyes shone with unshed sorrow. Yet even in her grief, she never gave up the faint hope that one day they would return. She had learned to rule with both strength and patience, believing that the stars sometimes carried answers long after the questions were spoken. Her council often urged her to let go, to focus only on the present and the safety of her kingdom. But Serenia could not erase her daughters from her heart. A kingdom could be rebuilt if destroyed, but a mother's bond could never be replaced. She carried that truth with her every day, and it shaped every decision she made as ruler. Still, her sorrow was not weakness. Her people respected her more deeply for the calm resolve she carried. They knew that even through personal loss, she had not abandoned them. Her strength gave them strength. When they bowed before her, it was not only for her crown but also for the dignity with which she bore her pain. As evening came, she stood at her balcony. The skies of Lyra stretched wide, filled with violet clouds glowing under the light of two suns. She let the breeze touch her face and closed her eyes. For a moment, she imagined hearing the faint laughter of her daughters again, running down the palace steps, calling for her. She smiled softly, though it lasted only a breath. Deep inside, she knew the truth her people did not speak aloud. Some wounds never heal. They only rest quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the day they are touched again. Serenia promised herself that if her daughters lived somewhere in the vast galaxy, she would find them. If they had perished, then at the very least she would carry their memory so they would never be forgotten. And so the queen ruled on, her heart heavy yet unbroken. Unknown to her, far beyond the borders of her realm, fate was already moving. The stars had not yet spoken their last word about her daughters. The Lyre Palace had always welcomed envoys, merchants, and travelers from across the galaxy, but very few humans had ever walked through its shining gates. Their kind was still new to the wider union of worlds. Some saw them as curious allies, others as reckless wanderers who took risks no one else dared. On the morning the human explorer arrived, the palace was filled with whispers. His name was Captain Elias. He came not with a fleet or an army, but with a small ship that looked patched together from parts of different worlds. His clothes were simple, worn from long travel, and his eyes carried the sharpness of one who had seen both danger and wonder in equal measure. When he entered the great hall, many council members frowned, but Elias stood tall, unshaken by the weight of their stares. Queen Serenia watched him carefully from her throne. She had seen many visitors in her lifetime, but something about this human felt unusual. He did not bow as deeply as others, nor did he cover his words with flattery. Instead, he spoke directly, his voice steady and respectful. "Your Majesty," Elias began, "I come with news that may be of great importance to you. I have traveled through distant colonies, forgotten stations, and lawless outposts. In one of those places, I found something that I believe belongs to your house." The court grew restless. Some leaned forward with suspicion, others with curiosity. Humans were known to be bold storytellers, sometimes too bold for their own good. But the queen raised her hand, silencing the chamber, and gestured for him to continue. From his pack, Elias drew a small object wrapped in cloth. When he unwrapped it, the queen's breath caught in her throat. It was a pendant, delicate and old, carved in the shape of a star entwined with vines, the royal crest of Lyra. Her youngest daughter had worn it always, a gift from Serenia on her 5th naming day. The queen had searched for it in the ruins of the war but had never found it. Whispers filled the chamber. The counselors exchanged doubtful looks. One of them stepped forward. "This could be a forgery. Humans are clever with tricks. What proof do you have that this was not stolen from our archives?" Elias did not flinch at the accusation. Instead, he placed the pendant gently at the queen's feet and bowed his head. "I found this in the hands of a child," he said. "Not a Lyre child, but one who looked like she carried your blood. She was not alone. I saw another with her, older, watching over her. They were not in a place of safety. They were captives." The queen's heart pounded. Her hands tightened around the arms of her throne. She wanted to believe, yet she feared false hope. For years she had dreamed of news like this, only to wake to silence. Could it truly be possible that her daughters still lived? The council began to argue among themselves. Some demanded that the human be sent away until his claims could be proven. Others insisted that any chance, no matter how small, must be taken seriously. But Queen Serenia lifted her hand again, and all voices fell silent. She studied Elias with piercing eyes. "Why bring this to me?" she asked. "What do you seek in return for such dangerous words?" Elias shook his head. "I seek nothing, Your Majesty. I could have walked away. I could have left the outpost and forgotten what I saw. But I did not. I brought this to you because I believe children should not be left in chains, and because a mother deserves to know the truth." The chamber grew quiet. For the first time in many years, a flicker of hope lit within the queen's chest. She looked down at the pendant, then back at the human. His words carried no polish, no attempt to please, yet they struck deeper than any counselor's speech. "Captain Elias," she said at last, her voice firm yet shaken with emotion, "you have given me more than you know. If what you say is true, then the stars have not turned their back on me. Her people watched as the queen, who had endured years of silent grief, straightened her shoulders with new purpose. The humans stood calmly, waiting for her judgment, knowing the path ahead would not be easy. And though doubt lingered among the council, the queen's heart whispered that fate had just opened a door she had long thought closed. The queen could not sleep that night. The pendant lay on the table beside her, catching the faint glow of the palace lanterns. She had held it so many times before, in memories of her youngest daughter Selene, who never removed it even while she slept. Now it was in her hands again, returned not by a search fleet or loyal scout, but by a human traveler who spoke with honesty in his eyes. She wanted to believe, yet fear pressed on her heart. What if the man had been mistaken? What if the children he had seen only resembled her daughters? She had lived too long with disappointment to allow hope to rise unchecked. At dawn, she called Elias to her private chamber, away from the voices of the council. She needed to hear more from him without interruption. The human entered with a calm step, though he bowed lightly out of respect. His eyes did not wander across the treasures of the room. Instead, they focused on her, as though the queen herself was the only matter of importance. "Tell me everything," Serenya said. "Do not leave out a single detail. Where did you see them? How did they look? Speak plainly." Elias nodded. "It was on the edge of the Kareth wastes, in a station controlled by scavengers. A harsh place where law does not reach. I was searching for supplies, nothing more, but I heard rumors of children kept in the lower levels. I went to see for myself." He paused, as if recalling the moment clearly. "I saw two girls. The younger carried this pendant. She guarded it as if it were her only treasure. The older stood close to her, protective. Their hair, their faces, the way they moved it was unlike the others. They were not scavenger children. They carried dignity even in chains." The queen's heart clenched. The image Elias painted was so close to her memories. Selene had always clutched the pendant tightly whenever frightened. Lyra, the elder, had always placed herself between danger and her sister. "Did they speak?" Serenya asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to remain strong. "They spoke little," Elias replied. "But when the guards left, I heard them whisper to each other. The younger called the elder by the name Lyra. That was when I knew this was not chance." The queen's breath caught. The room seemed to grow still around her. Lyra. The name that lived in her heart every day. Elias had no way of knowing it unless he truly heard it. The proof was no longer just the pendant. It was the sound of her daughter's name carried by a stranger across the stars. Still, her doubts did not vanish. "Why did you not take them then?" she asked. "Why come here instead of freeing them?" Elias looked down, his jaw tight. "Because I could not. The station was heavily guarded. To act recklessly would have endangered them further. I swore to myself I would not risk their lives for the sake of my pride. I thought it wiser to bring this knowledge to you, so we might act with care." The queen studied him in silence. His answer carried no weakness, only honesty. Many warriors would have rushed into danger to prove their courage, but Elias had chosen restraint. For the first time, she felt the strange strength of a human's judgment. "You understand the danger," she said. "You know the risk of speaking such things to me. If you lied, your life would not be your own." "I know," Elias said simply. "But I would not stand silent while children suffer. Even if they were not yours, I would have spoken." The queen turned away, her eyes resting on the morning light spilling across the balcony. Hope and fear battled within her chest, but for the first time in many years, she allowed herself to imagine her daughters alive, waiting somewhere beyond her reach. When she faced Elias again, her expression was no longer sorrowful but determined. "If what you say is true, then I must act. The council will resist, but I will not ignore this. You will guide us to the station." Elias bowed once more. "I will take you there, Majesty. But we must move carefully. The scavengers trust no one, and they do not surrender what they hold." The Queen's voice grew firm. "Then we will show them the strength of a mother who has waited too long." The pendant gleamed in her hand as she closed her fingers around it. For years she had held only silence and fading memories. Now she held proof, fragile yet powerful, that her daughters still lived. And though shadows of doubt still lingered, the Queen's heart burned with a fire that had long been buried. She would not let the chance slip away. The council chamber was filled with sharp voices the next morning. The Queen had announced her decision to investigate the humans' claim, and her advisors were unsettled. Some argued it was too dangerous to follow the word of a stranger. Others feared it was a trap set by enemies to lure their ruler away from the safety of the palace. Queen Serenia listened to every voice, her expression calm but unyielding. When they had spoken, she rose from her seat, her presence commanding silence. "I have ruled with patience," she said, her voice echoing across the crystal hall. "I have endured sorrow without letting it break me. But now, for the first time in many years, I have been given proof that my daughters may live. I will not sit idle while they remain in chains. If this is a risk, then I will face it. If it is a lie, then I will uncover it myself." The council bowed reluctantly. They could not oppose her will, though unease remained. Serenia turned to Elias, who stood at the edge of the chamber, quiet and steady. He gave a slight nod, as though ready to take the burden of guiding them. Preparations began at once. A small escort was chosen, not an entire fleet, for secrecy was more valuable than strength in numbers. The Queen's most loyal guards stepped forward, each sworn to protect her even at the cost of their own lives. Elias studied the maps of their route, pointing out safe paths and hidden dangers. His knowledge of remote outposts was far greater than the council expected. On the day of departure, the palace was hushed. Citizens gathered outside the gates to watch their queen walk to the waiting ship. She wore no crown, only the silver circlet of her house, simple and firm. The pendant rested beneath her robe, close to her heart. Elias walked at her side, his stride confident but respectful, and the guards followed in silence. The ship lifted from the ground, breaking through the violet skies of Lyra. Serenia stood at the viewing window, watching her home shrink below her. She had not left her world in many years, not since the loss of her daughters. Now the stars stretched before her like an endless road, and for the first time, she walked it not for her people alone but for her family. The journey was long. Through regions of empty space and drifting wreckage, the ship pressed onward. There were nights when the Queen sat alone in her chamber, the hum of the engines filling the silence. She would close her eyes and imagine her daughters' faces, older now, shaped by years she had missed. The thought filled her with both hope and sorrow. Elias often joined her, not as a soldier but as a companion in quiet moments. He told her stories of places he had seen, worlds of burning deserts, oceans that stretched without end, and stations built from broken ships clinging together. His voice carried no arrogance, only wonder, as though he spoke not to impress but to share. The Queen listened, sometimes smiling faintly at his simple way of describing the vastness of the galaxy. When problems arose, it was Elias who often found solutions. Once, when a navigation system failed, he used old star charts and his own memory to guide them until repairs were complete. Another time, when supplies ran short, he suggested simple rationing methods that stretched their stores without hardship. The guards, at first doubtful of him, began to nod with respect at his resourcefulness. Serenya noticed this too. Humans were often considered reckless, but Elias showed a balance between daring and caution. He did not rush into danger thoughtlessly, yet he did not shrink from it either. His presence eased the weight of the journey, reminding her that she was not alone in this search. Days turned into weeks, and at last the ship approached the edge of the Kareth wastes. The region was known for scavengers and forgotten wars, a place where law had no reach. The stars here were dim, as though even light hesitated to remain. Elias studied the view with a hardened gaze. "We are close," he said quietly. "Beyond those fields of wreckage lies the station I spoke of. But we must be careful. Too much strength shown will draw attention. Too little will invite attack." The queen stood beside him, her eyes on the dark horizon. Her heart was steady, though inside it beat with anticipation. "We will move with purpose," she said. "My daughters are there. I will not turn back now." The guards readied themselves. The ship's engine slowed as they entered the shadow of broken hulks drifting through space. The journey that had begun with whispers and doubt was now leading them to the threshold of truth. The queen placed her hand over the pendant at her chest. For years she had prayed for even the smallest sign. Now she had more than a sign. She had a path. And with each passing moment, she drew closer to the day she would look into her daughter's eyes again. The Kareth waste stretched like a graveyard of forgotten wars. Broken ships drifted in silence, their metal frames glowing faintly from old burns. The queen's vessel moved carefully through the field, guided by Elias, who knew the safe paths between wreckage and hidden traps. Every guard was alert, hands close to their weapons, eyes scanning the darkness. At last, the station came into view. It was not a grand structure but a cluster of welded hulls and platforms, hanging together like a patchwork fortress. Rust and shadows covered its surface. Small ships floated nearby, clearly belonging to scavengers who called this place home. The outpost had no beauty, only survival, and it radiated danger to all who looked upon it. From the viewing window, Queen Serenya studied the place with unblinking eyes. Somewhere within those cold walls, her daughters were waiting. She pressed her hand over the pendant at her chest, her heart steady with both fear and determination. "We cannot storm the station," Elias explained, his voice calm. "They have defenses that would cut us down before we reach the gates. But they value trade. If we approach as travelers, they may let us inside." The guards exchanged uneasy glances, but the queen nodded. "Then we will play their game," she said. "But once we are inside, we will find them. No matter the cost." The ship docked at one of the outer platforms. As the doors opened, the smell of rust and smoke filled the air. Figures approached, rough-looking scavengers dressed in patched armor. Their leader, a tall man with sharp eyes, studied the newcomers with suspicion. "Travelers from Lyra," Elias said, stepping forward with a neutral smile. "We seek trade and information." The scavenger leader narrowed his eyes at the human but allowed them through. The group entered the outpost, moving through dim corridors lined with flickering lights. Merchants shouted over worn goods, children with hollow eyes darted through the crowd, and guards armed with crude weapons kept watch from the shadows. The queen kept her hood raised, hiding her face. To reveal her identity here would be dangerous. Yet inside, her heart raced as her gaze swept across every corner. She searched for a glimpse of the children Elias had spoken of. At last, as they reached the lower levels, Elias slowed his pace. He gave a small signal with his hand, and the queen followed his line of sight. Beyond a row of barred doors, a group of captives sat in silence. Among them were two girls. One was older, her back straight, her eyes sharp with quiet defiance. The other was smaller, clutching something close to her chest. The queen's breath caught. Even from a distance, she knew them. Lyra and Selene. They were older now, marked by years of hardship, but their faces were the same faces she had kissed goodnight so many times. Her heart ached to run forward, to break the bars with her own hands, to call their names. But Elias touched her arm lightly, shaking his head. His voice was low and steady. Not yet. If we act now, we will bring every guard upon us. We must plan. Serenya forced herself to still her heart. She stood in the shadows, drinking in the sight of her daughters. Selene held the pendant tight in her small hand, just as Elias had said. Lyra leaned close to her sister, whispering softly, her eyes scanning the room with protective focus. Even in chains, they were bound together, strong in ways that filled their mother with pride. One of the scavenger guards noticed the group lingering too long and barked at them to move along. Elias gave a quick nod, guiding the queen and her guards away. Only when they reached an empty corridor did Serenya finally let out the breath she had been holding. "They live," she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time in years. "By the stars, they live." The guards bowed their heads in respect, sharing her relief, though none dared to celebrate yet. The danger was far from over. Elias leaned against the wall, his eyes hard with thought. "We cannot fight them head-on. Their numbers are greater, and they know this place better than we ever could. But they are greedy. Greed makes them careless. If we create a distraction, we can draw their attention away from the cells long enough to free the girls." The queen turned to him, her expression fierce and steady. "Then we will do it. Whatever it takes." Elias met her gaze, a small spark of respect shining in his eyes. "You have waited for years, Majesty. Now comes the moment to take them back." The queen straightened her shoulders. Her sorrow was no longer silent. It had transformed into fire. Her daughters were alive, and she would not leave without them. The outpost loomed around them, filled with danger, but for Serenya, fear no longer mattered. Hope had returned, and it gave her strength no enemy could break. The queen's heart burned with both hope and fear as she prepared for what lay ahead. She had seen her daughters with her own eyes, alive and breathing. That sight alone gave her strength, yet it also filled her with urgency. Every moment they remained in chains was another wound in her soul. In a quiet corner of the outpost, Elias spread a rough sketch of the station on the floor. He used scraps of metal to mark the positions of guards and the paths they had walked earlier. The queen and her loyal guards gathered around him, their faces tense in the dim light. "The cells are here," Elias explained, pointing to the lower section. "But this station thrives on trade. They keep their markets lit and noisy, especially during the evening. If we create confusion in the upper halls, many of the guards will leave their posts to protect the merchants. That is when we strike." One of the guards frowned. "Confusion is not enough. They will still have patrols in the lower levels." Elias nodded. "That is why I will lead a distraction myself. Humans are often underestimated. They think we are reckless, and I will use that to draw their eyes. While they chase me, you free the children. The queen shook her head firmly. You will not go alone. I will not risk losing the one person who brought me here. Elias studied her for a moment before a small smile touched his lips. Very well, but you must let me take the first step. They expect warriors to act with blades, not with tricks. Sometimes the smallest spark can set fire to the forest. When the hour came, the plan unfolded. The outpost's market was crowded, filled with merchants and scavengers trading goods. Elias slipped into the crowd with the queen at his side, her hood drawn low. At a stall of broken machines, Elias began to speak loudly, drawing attention with his sharp human tone. He spoke of treasures found in hidden wrecks, of wealth greater than the scavengers had ever seen. Curiosity drew many eyes. Some laughed, others demanded proof. Elias lifted a small device from his pack, an old beacon he had prepared. He twisted its core, and sparks erupted, shooting into the air with a crackle. Panic spread through the crowd as the sparks flew across the stalls. Merchants shouted, guards rushed forward, and chaos rippled through the market. In the confusion, the queen and her guards slipped away, moving swiftly down the shadowed corridors toward the cells. The sound of shouting and crashing above masked their steps. When they reached the barred doors, the queen's hands trembled. Her daughters sat inside, unaware of what was happening beyond. Selene clutched the pendant, her eyes wide as she looked up at the sudden arrival of strangers. Lyra rose quickly, placing herself between her sister and the intruders, her jaw set with defiance. The queen lowered her hood slowly. For a heartbeat, silence filled the air. Then Lyra gasped, her eyes widening with recognition. "Mother," she whispered, her voice breaking with disbelief. Tears filled Serenya's eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, my children. I have come for you." The guards worked quickly, forcing the lock until the bars gave way. The queen stepped forward, gathering her daughters into her arms. For the first time in years, warmth returned to her heart. Selene buried her face in her mother's robe, while Lyra clung tightly, as though afraid the moment would vanish. But the reunion was brief. The sound of boots thundered down the corridor. The scavengers had realized something was wrong. Elias appeared from the shadows, his clothes singed from the chaos above, but his eyes bright with determination. "They are coming," he said quickly. "We must move now." With her daughters by her side, the queen's sorrow transformed into fierce resolve. "Then we will fight if we must. I will not lose them again." The group moved swiftly, Elias guiding them through narrow passages he had memorized. Guards blocked their path, but the queen's escort fought with precision, forcing a way forward. Elias used his quick thinking to overturn crates, trigger doors, and send enemies chasing shadows instead of the real escape. Every step was a battle of heart and will, but the queen never faltered. With her daughter's hands in hers, she felt stronger than she had in years. No chain, no wall, no enemy could hold her back now. At last, the docking bay came into view. Their ship waited, its engines glowing faintly. Behind them, shouts and alarms echoed through the station. Ahead, freedom waited. As they rushed aboard, the queen turned once more to Elias. "You gave me back what I had lost. For that, no words will ever be enough." Elias shook his head, his voice calm despite the danger. "I only showed the path. You walked it with the strength of a mother. Now let us finish what we started." The ship's doors closed, and the engines roared to life. The outpost shrank behind them, filled with fire and chaos, while the queen held her daughters close. The daring rescue was complete. For the first time in years, hope had triumphed over sorrow. The ship cut through the dark sky, leaving the broken outpost far behind. For a long while, no one spoke. The queen sat in the cabin with her daughters beside her, their small hands still clutching hers as if afraid she might vanish. She studied their faces in silence, memorizing every detail: the lines of growth on Lyra's cheeks, the strength in her eyes, the way Selene's smile flickered shyly before settling in relief. Years had stolen much from them, but they had not taken away the bond between mother and child. Serenya felt her heart, once heavy with sorrow, now beating with warmth. She had dreamed of this moment so many times, and now it was real. Lyra was the first to speak, her voice quiet but steady. "We thought you were gone, mother. The scavengers told us no one would come." The queen pulled her closer, her voice gentle but firm. "Never believe them. From the day you were taken, not 1 hour passed when I did not think of you. I searched, I waited, and I prayed to the stars. And now you are here." Selene looked up, her eyes wide. "We wanted to be strong. Lyra always protected me. She said you would come. I tried to believe her, but sometimes it was hard." The queen kissed her forehead softly. "You were brave, both of you. Stronger than anyone had the right to be. You kept each other safe when I could not. Now it is my turn again." Elias stood nearby, watching the reunion quietly. He did not interrupt, but the queen noticed him and beckoned him closer. "My children," she said, her voice filled with gratitude, "this is Captain Elias. Without him, we would not be here together." Lyra studied the human with cautious eyes, then gave a small respectful nod. Selene offered a shy smile. Elias returned it with a simple bow, his words humble. "It was not only me. Your mother's strength led us here. I only showed the way." The journey back to Lyra took several days. During that time, the queen learned how her daughters had survived. Lyra spoke of the years in captivity, of how she shielded Selene and gave her hope when despair grew heavy. Selene spoke of dreams she held onto, dreams of the palace gardens, of laughter echoing in halls they barely remembered. The queen listened to every word, her hands never letting go of theirs. Each story was painful, yet each word was also a sign of their strength. Her daughters had endured what few could, and now they sat safe at her side. When the ship entered the skies of Lyra, the people were already gathered in the city below. News of the queen's daring journey had spread faster than light, carried by whispers and reports. Crowds filled the streets, their eyes lifted toward the heavens. When the royal vessel descended, a cheer rose that shook the very air. The palace gates opened, and Serenya stepped out holding the hands of her daughters. Gasps of wonder filled the crowd, followed by a roar of joy. Children pointed, elders wept, and warriors saluted with pride. Their queen, who had carried sorrow in silence for so long, now returned with hope beside her. The council, once doubtful, bowed deeply as the queen passed. No words could deny the truth of what stood before them. The princesses had returned. That night, the palace shone brighter than it had in years. Gardens were lit, music drifted through the halls, and laughter returned to the chambers where silence had once reigned. Serenya walked with her daughters through every corner of their home, showing them the places they once knew and the places that had been built in their absence. Later, when the palace grew quiet and the stars shone above, Serenya stood on her balcony with Elias at her side. The daughters slept safely at last, their burdens eased. "You have done more than save 2 lives," the queen said softly. You have restored a family. You have given back to a kingdom the joy it had lost. Elias looked out at the stars. I only did what anyone should. No child should be left behind. But I am glad I was the one who found them. The queen turned to him, her eyes filled with both gratitude and respect. You will always have a place here, not as a visitor, but as a friend of Lyra. My people will remember your courage. Elias bowed his head, but in his heart, he carried no pride, only quiet satisfaction. For him, the greatest reward was the sight of a mother reunited with her children, and the sound of joy restored to a world that had known too much sorrow. As the night deepened, Queen Serenia placed her hand over the pendant resting on her chest. Once it had been her only connection to her daughters. Now they were home, safe, and by her side. The stars above seemed brighter than before, as if the galaxy itself rejoiced. And in that moment, the queen knew that the long years of waiting had not been in vain. Her family was whole again.